Ripple's application for a Federal Reserve master account has people panicking right now. In this video, I want to talk about Ripple becoming a federally chartered bank and getting access to a Federal Reserve master account and what that means for the price of XRP moving forward. I also want to show you exactly why there is so much panic about this and what it means for the entire cryptocurrency industry if Ripple can pull this off. Like always, your support means so much to this channel. Thank you to everyone who takes the time to like these videos and subscribe to the channel. These two simple things really do help me out so much. Also, if you have any good place to buy some XRP, make sure to check out my favorite exchange upload down in the description of this video. That said, let's jump right into it, and I hope you guys enjoy the content. I want to start this video off and talk about exactly why we're seeing so much panic, where that panic is coming from, and then move in towards the end of the video and talk about what a Federal Reserve master account really means for Ripple and XRP. I want to start off though and highlight something that came up over the weekend. Over the weekend or over the last couple of days, we have had a lot of outcry about Ripple getting a Federal Reserve master account. Now, one of the most shocking things we saw was actually Caitlin Long. She's the CEO of Custodia Bank. She's a big advocate for the Bitcoin industry, looks like not really the cryptocurrency industry, but she put out an entire hit piece essentially on Ripple on this podcast. We're not going to listen to it. It's pointless, talking about essentially why people shouldn't be paying attention to XRP, why people shouldn't be paying attention to Ripple, which is kind of funny because why are you paying so close attention to Ripple and XRP and telling other people not to pay attention to Ripple XRP? But anyway, she put out this entire thing essentially spreading a whole bunch of misconceptions on Ripple and XRP. Now, some of the things she said in there was that Ripple did an ICO, that the XRP ledger is not decentralized. She said that ETH didn't do an IPO, and all these different things. Vet jumped on the correction, saying Ripple never had an ICO. The XRP ledger was created at the same time as XRP, and not a single coin was sold beforehand. In Caitlin Long's interview, she talks about how Ethereum was fairly distributed. Meanwhile, Ethereum is the one that had the ICO. They literally sold Ethereum before the Ethereum chain existed. And this is not up for debate. This is something that Vitalik and Joe Lubin literally attested to. They literally said, we had an ICO. Ripple very clearly never had an ICO. It's so funny to see her purposely or unintentionally, but kind of embarrassingly, get these very important facts wrong. Now, additionally, she talks about how the XRP ledger is not decentralized and is a centralized chain. There are over 1,000 nodes on the XRP ledger. Ripple has no control over the chain itself. It's obviously decentralized. It's almost a pointless thing to even talk about because anyone with a brain who can understand how these networks work can come to the conclusion that the XRP ledger is decentralized. The last thing that she's saying is that no one's using the XRP ledger and RLUSD is a pivot away from the XRP ledger. The XRP ledger was literally created for the purpose of tokenizing assets. I'll never understand how people can come out with the statement that Ripple, right, is pivoting away from the XRP ledger by issuing RLUSD. First of all, RLUSD runs on the XRP ledger, and more importantly, the entire purpose of the XRP ledger was for tokenized assets. One of the earliest visions of the creators of the XRP ledger was that fiat currency is not going away. And you have to create a system that works with the old system, one where you can tokenize these old forms of value. They knew the future we were heading into, people weren't going to be paying each other with Bitcoin, or nations weren't going to drop their sovereign currencies and replace them with a cryptocurrency asset, right? All that stuff is nonsensical. Ripple was one of the few companies who identified this in the early days and said, okay, well, maybe instead of building this idealistic society where everyone's paying each other with a volatile decentralized currency, right? And governments just drop their currency and switch over to a Bitcoin standard, right? Rather than building a system that goes to this world that's never going to happen, let's build a system that works with the current system, right? One where you can tokenize fiat deposits, tokenize dollars, tokenize yen, tokenize stocks, bonds. So the XRP ledger was literally made for things like RLUSD. So the fact that she thinks that's a pivot or is trying to use it against Ripple and XRP just shows a huge lack of understanding in why the XRP ledger was created the way it was, and that this is actually an extremely positive thing, but she essentially tries to make it a negative. Now, if you're wondering why people like her, someone who's so prominent in the cryptocurrency space, is so eager out of nowhere to start attacking a company like Ripple, guys, it all comes down to this. It all comes down to the Federal Reserve master account and Ripple filing to be a national trust bank. This is something that a lot of people have a lot of issues with. And what's the reason for that? The reason is because all these other cryptocurrency companies, right, who are much smaller and don't have that much firepower and don't have a board of directors with people from BlackRock and BNY Mellon like Ripple does, all of these people have been trying to get this Fed Master account for a very long time and have been very unsuccessful. My guess is that the reason why they are suddenly lashing out of nowhere about Ripple filing for one is because there's likely some rumors and tea leaves going around that Ripple is probably going to get this Fed Master account. So people like Caitlin Long are panicking because suddenly out of nowhere, they see Ripple coming in and cutting the line and getting this Fed Master account when they have been unsuccessful in doing it for such a long time. At the end of the day, this is something I've talked about extensively on the channel. Ripple's board of directors isn't full of a bunch of children and people who are trying to rip down the system. It's full of professionals who have resources and past experiences at places like the Federal Reserve. So they have the connections to actually make this happen. They can get in the room. They can actually get these things done. It's a huge advantage and one of the biggest things why I'm such a fan of how Ripple has done their business. They connect with the right people. They know who to go to, and they have the connections to actually make these very important things happen. Now, the other thing that essentially Ripple has a huge advantage on over the rest of these cryptocurrency companies is people like Caitlin Long's bank, right? They have to go acquire all the cryptocurrency assets and assets they want on their platform. Ripple already has their escrow, a war chest of billions of dollars of XRP. So they just have a huge advantage over the rest of the industry. And people like Caitlin Long then come out and complain, oh, Ripple shouldn't have all this money. They shouldn't have all this XRP. It's unfair, blah, 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 blah. They are really just saying that from the perspective of like, we don't have that. Like Ripple has all this money. They can go do all these really cool things and we can't do that. So we see that as unfair. Really, they just didn't have as good as an idea of what Ripple had using XRP. These people are cash poor. They don't have the connections to have a board of directors like Ripple. They don't have the money to go do these things. They don't have the networks to make it so that they can raise money and do all these cool things that Ripple can do. And that's why they see it as unfair. And that's why they're always trying to say, oh, XRP is a scam, or they're just dumping on retail. They're trying to convince retail that somehow all of these things Ripple are doing are a bad thing simply because they don't have the firepower to do it themselves. So you can really start to see why so many people lash out against Ripple and complain about XRP. It's really super simple. They're jealous. They're not in a position to compete on a lot of these things. For one reason or another, they took a different path that they thought was going to be a winning path, and now they're looking back on it and saying, oh, this might have been a mistake. Maybe we should have done what Ripple did. Maybe Ripple was always doing things the right way. And now they're stuck in this paradigm where they have to keep coming out and yelling about how Ripple is such a bad company and they're doing everything wrong. Meanwhile, Ripple continues to prove that they're doing everything right and making all these huge strides in the industry. Meanwhile, saying that Ripple is something you shouldn't pay attention to, but they can't stop paying attention to Ripple and can't keep Ripple off their mind. So it's just such a funny paradigm. It's like saying, oh, here's this massive, super successful company, but don't look at them. Look at my really small, niche, unsuccessful company. They're the bad guys. We're the good guys. And they're just bad because they're doing everything really well and getting everything right. XRP is a top 3 token. Ripple is arguably the most valuable company in the cryptocurrency space. The idea that somehow Ripple's making all these mistakes and isn't gaining traction and pivoting away from XRP, it's absolutely comical. If XRP was a bottom 500 asset, yeah, we can talk about how maybe it makes sense to pivot away from XRP. But sitting at the number 3 cryptocurrency, it's like, what are you even talking about, right? Where is this coming from? But it really comes down to the most important thing is why the Federal Reserve Master account? Why is that so important? And why does everyone want it? And why is Ripple at an advantage? Well, if you look at Ripple's board, there are multiple people on Ripple's board who are past Federal Reserve members. In fact, Ripple has been meeting with the Federal Reserve since 2013. So Ripple clearly has deep connections to the Federal Reserve. This is making people like Caitlin Long panic because she doesn't have good connections to the Federal Reserve. She's in a lawsuit against the Federal Reserve, right? So that's an issue. But the Federal Reserve Master account lets Ripple directly interact with the United States government. It lets them directly go into the place where money is issued in the first place. It makes it so Ripple can be a service provider for the United States government and can directly handle mint and withdraw money on the account of the government. This is one of the most powerful things Ripple could get their hands on because instantly it elevates them to a level of trust that cannot be replaced by anyone else. It puts Ripple in a position where they have direct backing in a way by the United States government and puts them in the most important financial place they can possibly be by being able to directly interact with the person or the entity, right? The United States government that issues all the money and is the most trusted and reliable source and piece of the entire financial system. This gives Ripple direct access to those accounts, bypassing every other company who is trying to do things in a different roundabout way through a fintech application or going through another bank or doing anything like that. It elevates Ripple amongst all of them and puts Ripple on an equal playing field to the JP Morgans and the Bank of Americas, the biggest banks on earth. Why do I think it's so likely that Ripple's going to get this? Well, first of all, we talked about the connections Ripple has just sitting on their board. But additionally, there was just an executive order that came out saying that the United States government and no bank can discriminate against a cryptocurrency company. So suddenly, out of nowhere, all these other cryptocurrency companies, right, couldn't get their foot in the door for the past 5 years. Now Ripple puts their foot in the door at the same exact time this anti-discrimination executive order gets put out, making it so that it's going to be really hard for them to ultimately deny Ripple from this application. This let Ripple cut the entire line and get access to one of the most powerful accounts out there, all while they have significantly more power and significantly more connections than anyone else trying to get this FedMaster account because of how they built the company. These other people were hoping they could front run Ripple and get their foot in the door before Ripple could get access to something like this. But Ripple just cut them all off with their connections, with their money, and is now able to likely be one of the first companies to get access to this very powerful monetary tool. This is why there's so much backlash against Ripple and XRP getting access to the FedMaster account. This could potentially position Ripple to be the most trusted and the most important cryptocurrency company globally. That's where the outcry is coming from. That is why people are saying, don't pay attention to Ripple, don't look at XRP, these are all bad things. Meanwhile, everything we are seeing on the fundamentals are to the contrary. Thank you so much for coming. I hope you enjoyed this update. And for now, Mickle out.